We'll talk now about Fiona Greenhill's work. I've talked a little bit about photography already, but I want to say a few more words about the place of photography in painting, because ever since photography was invented in the 19th century, people have been saying that it would mean the end of painting. You know, they said that in France in, I don't know the year, but 18-something, the death of painting. But of course, it's been anything but that. Painters have used photography in different ways. As far back as Manet, Degas, Bonnard are all artists who worked in different ways from photographs. Now, in the case of those 19th century artists, they had an academic education. They could draw the nude, you know, in an academic style, in a classical style. And so when they used photography, they probably used it a little bit differently as a sort of a memory aid. I know that Bonnard used it as a means of abstracting the figure into strange shapes. He loved to find that, to make snapshots and see the funny shapes that a figure in movement would take on. And of course, that's something that it's very hard to isolate when you're just looking through the naked eye. But what has happened in the 20th century is that many painters have painted from photographs with the specific purpose of asking, well, what is the difference between the seen image through our naked eye and looking through the lens? And this painting by Fiona Greenhill takes us into that, but also takes us into abstraction. So it's a painting that sort of dances between the most abstract end of the spectrum and the most realistic end of the spectrum with photography, and ends up sitting somewhere in the middle. Now, what she's actually trying to say about that, or I don't know if she's trying to say anything, she could well just enjoy that intriguing play of how it becomes a figurative image from a long way away and becomes just bubbles and shapes when you move up close. And if you haven't been up close to look at it yet, do so when I've finished, because you'll see that it's a vastly different picture from where I'm standing to where you're standing at the other side of the room. But yeah, I think this artist enjoys the irony of being, as I said, at once at the most far limit of abstraction, but also in that photographic realm. The final work I'm going to talk about is the winner, which is Nicholas Blauer's, and the painting is called, let me just check that, Collapsed Regrowth 2. And it's interesting how many square paintings I've talked about, and also how many squarish paintings there are in this exhibition. There's something about the square that people are enjoying as a means of framing landscape, and I wonder whether it takes the artist away from the more scenic and sort of traditional connotations of the wide canvas. You know, the wide panoramic canvas brings you back to tradition, to that sense of the landscape opening from left to right before you. But working just within a pure square is more like taking a neutral chunk of landscape and saying, just look at that, you know, I'm not going to let you go out or up, just stay here. And so in a sense, the very choice of the square as a format is an abstracting device, okay? And I think the success of this painting, and in this instance I have to say I think the judges are right, and I think it's a really appropriate winner, because I think this painting has a nice sense of balancing the abstract properties of a viewed landscape with an absolute realism. But it's not the realism of the past. It feels really charged. It doesn't feel nostalgic. It doesn't feel... it's not even made in quite the same way that Rembrandt would have made a landscape, or that the French plein air painters would have made a landscape. He's got a technique here that is quite unique and quite fresh. If you haven't seen it from a long way away, if you haven't seen it from up close, do so afterwards, because once again, you've got to move up close to see the way that probably a painting knife or maybe a piece of fine card, I'm not sure what he's used, but each of these tree trunks is made from just continuous little movements of a small piece of a small tool. Or then these saplings here, or pieces of brush, have a kind of they're single lines, but the strength of the widest line to the faintness of the more soft lines creates that incredible sense of depth that you feel like you could walk in and actually crunch those twigs under your feet. You know, you can hear the sound of it. This is once again a very tonal palette, a very restricted palette. It moves from that, what I think is probably a burnt sienna down here, to a grey up the top, that is probably the product of burnt sienna and Prussian blue, possibly. And that makes a black, and that's the colour that you're still seeing exposed in the background. So somehow, and I'm not sure quite how he's done it, he's put those colours down and then through a process of scraping back to the white while the paint is still wet, so there's a narrow kind of time frame within which that has to happen, he's managed to pull it all together. And the orchestration of space, you know, weaving in, through and in and back and out is really elegant. In fact, just like Ian Grant's painting that I started with, where you had the single tree, and that was the point of focus, although here our focus is dispersed through many trees, I feel like there's a sense of finally arriving around this part of the canvas with this kind of crossing of branches and then the space behind, giving you a real kind of a climax to what is otherwise a fairly what we call an all-over composition, a composition where the attention is here, there, and everywhere. So anyway, just to finish on, with the thing between the theme of, you know, the artist and tradition, I think this is a really effective and strong example of an artist extending the tradition of realism in this case and making it fresh and real again, which not all of the paintings in this show, I have to say, do, in my opinion. But I think this one does it, and it's a very hard thing to do. And with the crowded field of art, you know, all of art history behind you, it's become, I think, an increasingly difficult thing to do. And it's a very small thing to do because you're not introducing new concepts, you're really honing and rethinking very familiar ideas. But when someone does it convincingly, it still has that really impressive and profound effect. And I think this painting has it. Again, they're all over compositions. I'll say again, that's a term that comes from American painting of the mid-20th century, abstract expressionism. All over painting is where the canvas is like a field within which you deploy a lot of little bits and pieces. The eye moves all over it, which is distinct from European scenic painting where you end up going towards a main figure or tree or something. So they're all over compositions, but yeah, so yeah, indeed, there is. And that's, I mean, painting, whether it's realism, abstraction, photo painting, ultimately you're working with a language of form that has consistent principles. You know, colour behaves in consistent ways, whether you're, whatever your style. So yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, one of the things I didn't talk about, and there's a bit of it in this show, is the collaging aesthetic of, I think it's Kent Chuang over here, the work with all of the little boxes. And also this red work that I don't know the artist's name or the title of the work, but, and indeed Catherine Hatton here. So there's a bit of collaging going on too, but for some reason I shied away from talking about that. I guess I'm just more of a brush person than a cut and paste person. Often that thing of painting around the edges is understood as a means of turning the painting back into an object rather than a picture plane. And I think he's right to keep it on the plane because he's a realist. It's about that space of the front plane. A lot of minimalist painters who might just paint a canvas orange, for example, would bring the orange around because they want to confront you with the fact that this is a canvas hanging on a wall. But this is a more illusionistic painting, and therefore I think his decision to stay on the plane is a sound decision. But yeah, I mean, some people paint around the edges, but there you go, yeah. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Marlene.
This is just a very small token of
Thanks a lot. That's lovely.
Your floor talk inspired me.
Yeah.
I now want to start painting again.
Oh, good.
So I'm sure it did that to lots of
Thanks, Marlene. Thank you.
Today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Oh, good.